I can't fix any one of these people, which is funny because when I started doing this at that women's shelter, as my first thought was, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to fix all these people. We're going to have to close the shelter down so I can get all these people fixed. And it wasn't long before God humbled me. And he said, Rich, you can't fix any of these people, but you can introduce them to me and I can take it from there.
This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome everyone. This is again one of my favorite times when I have a guest on this podcast. And today we have a very special person. His name is Rich Schaus, and he is near Muskogee, Oklahoma. And he is the executive director for the Gospel Rescue Mission. And so, Rich, welcome to the podcast today.
I am thrilled and excited to be here with you today.
And you apparently have been listening. You've heard a number of our podcasts in the past, and so we're grateful to you for that. And you still were willing to come on with us today, so you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was redoing the Experiencing God workbook, and as I was doing that study, I felt like I needed to get a little bit more, so I did some research, and your podcast came up, and I've been listening to it ever since.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we love that. And Rich, you lead a gospel rescue mission. We're gonna get into that, but you've had an interesting background as well. You were in an artillery I don't know what you call it, division, or what would you call it that you're in?
Part of an artillery battalion or battery. Then eventually I was at battalion level, so I would do some work at that stage.
So tell me, this is a leadership podcast, and it is interesting to watch people in leadership. Oftentimes we don't stay doing the same things that we started out doing, but God teaches us important lessons along the way so that we're ready for the next assignment that he has for us. And so I'm just going to guess that you as a young man were not thinking, one day I really want to lead a gospel rescue mission. But you apparently joined the Army, and you were in the artillery. Tell us a little bit about your journey. At what, as you went along, at what point did you begin to sense that maybe God had wired you to lead, and what kind of things have you led up to where you are today?
Well, it kind of starts out with me being a leader of our youth group. The youth group adult leader was resigning, and I thought I would take over and just keep the thing going. And I completely failed. It was like the worst leadership blunder I ever did. And I look back if I could give myself advice, there's a lot of things I would have told me to go back and do that maybe would have saved that youth group. But without the adult connection, and I was too proud to go talk to the leadership of the church and say, could you help me out and do all that? I just thought, well, I can do it. And I failed because of that. Then, as far as other leaders,
I had a similar thing, actually, Rich. I was, when I was a youth, we didn't have any adults helping us either. And so I sort of led it, and it kept going. I'm not sure how well I did, but I had a similar experience where I learned some valuable lessons early on in my life as well.
And the biggest lesson is learning that pride can get in your way. It's will to destroy your leadership. No matter how smart you might be or strong you might be, pride is just a real damaging weapon that the enemy uses, no matter what kind of leadership you're doing. But what kind of saved me in the leadership realm was I was in the Boy Scouts, and I had a great scoutmaster who encouraged me and inspired me, kept pushing me forward. I ended up as an Eagle Scout. Kind of barely made it, but he helped grow that. Then I kind of went off the rails for a little while. I was a wild child there, kind of living for the world. And when I came to Christ, the first thing that God said is I needed some discipline in my life. And I heard that very clearly, but I didn't know how do I do discipline on my own. I was very confused. What would you have me do? How would I do this discipline thing you're talking about, God? And so the Army kept coming up, and I started as an enlisted soldier. That's where I started to get my initial discipline, basically exercise, eating right, study, all those things. To be a good soldier, it's much more than just shooting. Shooting is part of that training, but I was a medic, so I had to learn all the medic school training and doing all that. But I also thought I was going to hate the Army when I started up, and God got a hold of my heart, and I just fell in love with the discipline and the camaraderie of these guys I was close with. These were like my best friends. And so I decided I'm going to go full time and be an artillery officer. I was going to do this for the rest of my life. This is what I'm going to do. So I really did, like you said, it was not my intention. It was my intention to stay there forever. Maybe retire in my 50s and go out and do something else. But anyway, I went through ROTC. I get into artillery battalion, and I'm miserable. There was a lot of politics that kind of gets involved in some of that. There was a lot of negativity that was happening. I also had a bad attitude about some things. In the meantime, I had gotten married. I had just one child at the time, and I was starting to get a real bad attitude about spending time away from them. And I was planning on getting out. I prayed about it. I was like, okay, I need to get out. But God, in his wisdom, forced me in for one more year. And so I finished out one more year. In the course of that year, I learned all the administrative skills that I use primarily in my job today. If I take that year out, I don't know how to do the managerial, the leadership elements of what I do every single day. It's working with other people, a very diverse group of people, people with different opinions and ideas. This was all during the hanging Chad election with George W. Bush and the debates and arguments are what that was all about. And it seems kind of mild compared to some of the more recent political fights.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was pretty intense. It was like, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah.
So that one year, I had another child during that time. I learned how to balance work with my family. That was an important piece that I was able to figure out in that last year. And then I got out and decided I was going to be a pastor. So I landed in Spokane, Washington, and I was just looking for jobs, and I'd apply for 200 jobs a week, and I was getting nothing. And I was very disappointed, but I thought I need to get something to pay the bills while I wait for a real job to come in. And so I took a job at it was called Ann Ogden Hall. It was a Union Gospel Mission women's facility. And I put in my application not knowing it was a women's facility. I don't know what I thought, homeless women would go. It didn't dawn on me that they would actually have a place. But I apply, I get in, and they were looking, and they had never done this before, but they said, we were looking at this specific time for a healthy male to help these women to heal. These are women who have been mostly hurt by men, and they need someone who can be a man of God, who can love them and care for them and not abuse them or use them for their own gratifications. And they decided I was that guy. And so I stepped into that role. And again, that was supposed to be my short-term gig. I was supposed to only do that until I got a real ministry job. And I thought real ministry was pastoring or teaching at a Bible college or something. This working with the homeless, that can't be real ministry. I don't understand all that. But something happened in those first couple months is I fell in love with the families, the men, the women who were there, their children. And God just birthed this inside of me. And I fell in love with them. And God did give me the opportunity to pastor at the same time. But it really gave me a real contrast as I was pastoring the church and then going to the homeless shelter. And my love for those who were homeless far exceeded what I was feeling for the people in the church. And God just proved me, this is where you need to be. It's where you need to invest your time. And I remember God laying it out for me is, Rich, you got to choose. Are you going to choose the church, kind of an easy road? An easy road's kind of, I realize that's kind of a silly thing to say for pastors because it's not an easy road, really. But compared to dealing with people who are extremely mentally ill, who are deep in their addictions, people who are going to physically threaten you on a weekly or monthly basis, I will get a threat of some type, or I could do a church. And so God laid it out, said, this is what I want you to choose. And he gave me an opportunity to be an associate pastor in a very large church in Seattle, or I could take over a crisis shelter that was in the red light district, literally surrounded by evil. I had a brothel on one side of my facility that the police looked away from because they got good drug information. So they let the brothel happen. So I would see these girls going in every single day, being abused and doing their trade. And then on the other one side of my building, I had Hell's Angels Clubhouse. And then I had a hardcore liquor store on the other side, and then two meth houses that were the block behind me. So literally surrounded by the forces of evil. And that was the best time of my entire life, to share the gospel in the midst of that incredible darkness. And I enjoyed it. It was a passion. I never slept really because I'm worried about these girls. I want them to be better and safe. And God did some fun things there too. It's amazing what God does. is we had trouble with domestic abuse. A lot of our ladies coming out of a domestic abuse, but abusers can legally stand on the sidewalk and harass. There's nothing legally illegal about staying on a public sidewalk. And I thought, what am I going to do? I can't be here all the time to chase them off and do this. But one day, Hell's Angels guys found out about this, and they don't worry too much about what the law is. And the sidewalk happened to be next to them, and they came in, they took care of that for me. He put it in their heart.
Wow. As only they can.
As only they can. Even God's going to use someone like the Hell's Angels to do this. And
wow.
They weren't, I'm pretty sure that none of them had a relationship with God. I did witness to them and share with them, but God still used these folks, and it was a beautiful thing to see.
Wow.
But then anyway, I was doing that for quite a while, and decided I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. I wanted to become an executive director. So I went to my executive director, said, I'd like to have your job someday. What do I need to know? I don't necessarily recommend that for everybody because not everybody's secure enough. I'm fortunate that he was very secure in his position and how he felt. And he mentored me for those next 5 years. My vision was that he would retire and I would step into his shoes. And I mean, I probably shouldn't say it this way, but unfortunately he stayed healthy. And so I was never going to step into his shoes. He just kept going. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that he actually did retire. And so I could have been waiting around for that. But about 9.5 years ago, I put in an application right about this time of year. It was time for me to go. And I put in applications all over the country to be an executive director. One of them was in Salem, Oregon, very well run, very strong leadership over the years, well funded. It was kind of a turnkey. There wasn't a lot of extra work. I could come in and kind of take my time getting used to it and work my way in. Or I could come to a place I had never really heard of, except for there's a song, Muskogee from Okie from Muskogee.
Okie from Muskogee.
It's got a song about not smoking marijuana, which isn't true anymore in Oklahoma, but it was at the time. But I'd never really heard of Muskogee. And I did the research on it, and it had some deep challenges over the years. So the 1990s, there had been an embezzlement scheme, and front page of the paper, and that was still being brought up as I'm interviewed, and I'm talking with people, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to come here or not. I was still being brought up. And then the guys who took over after the embezzlement didn't know really what they were doing, except for they knew they didn't want any press. We don't want anybody to talk to us. Yeah. We don't want to pretend like we don't exist, so they forget about all this. Not remembering a small town never forgets. From 1993 until I showed up in 2015, it was very little in the press. A little bit here and there, but very little. They kept it on the down low, which is good from a media standpoint, but bad from a fundraising standpoint. So I came in with a place that was unknown. And again, it comes to that decision. Do I want a turnkey, some kind of a somewhat easier life, or do I want the challenge? And I heard God clear as day say, Rich, I designed you for the challenge. I put steel into your bones. I was born and raised in a steel town. And I expect you to go in there and fix this and make it right and have an impact on people's lives. So I came in, I moved us from one facility that was built before we were even a state. Kind of a fun story is I invited some electricians to come help to make repairs to the building, and they literally wept. Like, we can't fix this. So this is like
that's not a good
early development. It had no electricity when they first built the building, but they worked it out, and they were like, we can't do this. We don't want to do it anymore. So we moved to a new location where we basically doubled our capacity. And we also quit doing some of the things that used to be done. It used to be kind of a flop house where there were drug deals happening in the dining room, a lot of wrong going on. And we came in and said, we want you to have a better life. You can't flourish in that environment. So we created basically like a greenhouse for people's life. So we teach them and coach them. We inspire them. We believe that they have great value that God has placed within them that can really benefit our community if we would just be willing to look at it and help them to develop that and nurture that. So that's what we've been doing since I got here in 2015, is changing into that. And we continue to change. I'm always reading, learning, talking with others. I don't always agree with them, but I can usually pick out some nugget that I can learn from them and apply it to what we're doing.
Well, Rich, a lot of people, I mean, I've done some ministry over the years to the down and out, soup kitchens and different things. And that's for a lot of people, they're very uncomfortable around that type of person. going out on the streets. We're happy to maybe donate some money to it, but getting out there is not. Most people, if they can get a nice, comfortable church job somewhere, that's much more attractive. But what advice would you give just an ordinary person? Because I've also over the years done some work in at least visited, administered some in prisons, and it always strikes me that Jesus, when he talks about who really knew him, said, I was hungry, didn't feed me, was naked, didn't clothe me, was in prison, didn't visit me. And so much of the test, whether you really know Jesus or not, is whether you help the down and out, the lower echelons, if you will, of society. And so what advice, I know you've thought lots about that. What advice do you give to an ordinary person that maybe goes to a kind of a safe, comfortable church? Maybe they think they care about the poor and the homeless, the addicts, but what advice would you give them? Maybe to dip their feet in the water, or what do they need to know about these people that might help them want to get more involved?
Well, the book Tragedy of American Compassion just talks about charity with tongs. We kind of want to give it from a distance. And the truth is that what we want to do is we want to acknowledge their humanity. So if you see a panhandler, I don't recommend giving them money, but look them in the eye, acknowledge their humanity, maybe ask them their name is. And when they're coming to your window, you don't have time to get their whole story. But if you do have time, and it does, the Holy Spirit lets you feel it is safe. It isn't always safe. Some of these guys are really good manipulators, and it's not always safe to invite them into your home. But we have our main panhandling place is right next to Chick-fil-A. And so other than Sunday, it's a great time to say, well, if you say you have a sign saying we'll work for food, well, why don't you just come in and have lunch with me? Sit down and talk with them. Don't just give them food, but if you buy 2 sandwiches and visit with them, get to know their story. And you're going to discover that they have family, they have friends, they have experiences that are amazing. And they also, as you get to know them, you're going to find out that they have great potential. They have things that they can add to our community. And so if you start to see them that way, it's a real benefit. And I've gotten a real heart for this, trying to help the church help the people. Several years ago, before we left Washington, the last 2 years before we left Washington, we helped plant a church. And again, because it's who I am, I was helping plant this church in the worst neighborhood in the whole city. Really kind of a dangerous place. And we had this evening service, and every evening service, these 2 guys, Mike and Mark, they weren't twins, but you couldn't tell. They looked like twin brothers, but they were 1 year apart. And I never really remember which one was Mike and which one was Mark. I never quite fathomed that. But they always came in for our evening service. They were always drunk, always high, and the church just does not know how to act around that. Or we're not used to that as being part of our church service. And they would come in, and so what happened is the church would say, hey, Rich, go take care of your friends. Because I had the experience. I knew how to do it. And that worked okay while I was there. But once I left, there was nobody to care for Mike and Mark. And I was very concerned about them because nobody took over that mantle of caring for them. And so the church needs to realize they have the power of the living God to actually make a difference in these people's lives.
I know a lot of those folks have stories. They're not all the same, but what puts people, I mean, it just seemed like there's been a bit of it seemed like a rise in homelessness in recent years. What puts people, because I know a lot of the folks, and some of the ones I've even gotten to know, they at one time some of them were quite accomplished, and there's a lot of ex-military that are homeless, and they were very proficient when they were in the military, very disciplined. They come back, and there's some common kind of stories that puts people in the streets over time.
Addiction and mental illness is the top 2 on a regular basis. Domestic abuse is a close third, not just from men to women, but women to men as well. It'd be pretty amazing if you met some of the guys who are coming out of domestic abuse situations. Those are the top 3 reasons. But also, not to get too controversial, but a lot of the programs designed are to keep them in homelessness and poverty. Most of these agencies will make their money based on how many, like for our prisons in Oklahoma, it's probably the safest one to talk about, is they get paid by heads and beds. So the more people who are in prison, the more money they make. So there's no incentive for them to take the time to help care for them and love on them and help them quit being in need of their services. And that becomes true in a lot of the agencies that we end up working with. And if they have to continue to care for them kind of nonstop, the numbers just keep adding up and adding up and adding up. And eventually we just can't afford it.
And I'm sure you've seen some pretty radical transformations where people are right at the bottom in a sense. And yet, have you seen some real God stories take place in some people's lives where it seemed absolutely hopeless?
A mother called me. I get a lot of calls from mothers. I don't get a lot of calls from fathers, but a lot of mothers will call me and they'll say, Rich, can you take care of my son? He's been a mess. I can't have him for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes they've had to have their son arrested and they don't want to ever experience that again. So they want me to care for their son. So this mother called me and she said, can you go pick up my son from the jail? I was like, okay, sure. So I go to pick him up. And one piece of advice I will give is that you should ask what he looks like before you just go to a jail and pick up some random guy. It worked out. I got the right guy. But I'm sitting in the parking lot thinking, I don't know what he looks like. I'm picking up this guy named Mike, and I have no idea what he looks like. So I'm standing in front of my car, and this guy comes out, and he's kind of looking around. And I thought, well, maybe that's Mike. And I meet Mike. And Mike he had been really smart. He had been an electrician. He went to Oklahoma State University, had a good degree, had almost straight A's. And he was almost too smart for his own good. But he came home one day, he got this new job, and he was really excited about it. He was going to be like a head electrician. So it wasn't just an electrician now, he was the head electrician. And it came with a company car and all this beautiful stuff. He's really excited. Rushes home to tell his father, who him and his mother had been divorced for quite a while. But he wanted his dad to say how proud he was. He was really excited about this. But when he opens the door, his father had just committed suicide. So he finds his dad's body there. And it devastated Mike. And so Mike, instead of, he didn't have a church to go to, didn't have a relationship with anybody, he just went off the rails. And so he dove into his addictions, mostly methamphetamine, alcohol, obviously tobacco is almost always part of addiction, pornography, a lot of unhealthy relationships with women. Just way out there. And this was his lifestyle for about 5 years before I met him, in and out of jails and prisons. And like I said, I met him in jail. And I bring him to the mission. We had about a 45-minute car ride from where the jail was to the mission, and we got to know each other quite a bit. And I was thinking, he's probably not going to make it. He is so angry and bitter. He thinks God is just a four-letter word that should never be spoken. And anytime I mention anything about God, he could watch his face cringe. And he didn't want to talk about God. Well, one of the classes we offer is called Forging Past the Felony. So because of his felonies, he was a prime candidate to be in that class. It helps people build the character to overcome the difficulty that comes with having a criminal record. And Mike said, I'm going to be in this class, but I'm not really going to do anything. I'm just going to check the box. You want me there? I'll be there. But he actually continued going even after he left because his mother said he needed to. And so even after he moved out, he was still coming to that class, and he kept coming and kept coming. And I mostly felt like he was just there because of his mother. He wasn't really paying attention. But apparently he was. About 6 months later, he calls me on the phone, and he's quoting me to me about how he's making some of these changes, how he's actually thinking about possibility that maybe God is real and that God has done some things in his life. And took another 6 months, and he had a full-time job. And doing really well and was paying the bills, but he was still kind of bitter. And I thought, man, I got to help him get past his bitterness, help him get to this place of forgiveness and receive that forgiveness, but also give out some forgiveness for some people who had hurt him. And right about that time, his mother died. And like I said, his father's died had set him off the rails. And so I called him every single day. I spent time with him every single chance I got. And we were communicating really tightly, and he did not go off the rails this time. He went and inherited his mother's house in Arizona, had some more inheritance to it, but he was working then as a full-time electrician, doing some incredible things at that stage. And we just stayed in contact. Every couple of weeks, we talk on the phone, we pray together. He quit smoking, which was it was July 4th of, must have been 2021. He quit smoking. He said, I'm going to change my life. I want something different. Then he started going to an AA group that happened to meet in a church. And so he started going to that church and started having a relationship with people in that church. And so the real big story is that he now lives in a gated community, not like the jail, but, a regular high-end gated community. Has a brand new pickup truck that he's bought, and he goes to church regularly. And he called me about 4 months ago, and he said, You won't believe this, but you know the job that I lost when I went off the rails? I just got that same job back, same company, same perks, higher pay because, 15 years or whatever's passed, but he's got that same job, and he's bawling about how much God has restored what he lost, what he gave away. And that's like my favorite, because it's just a beautiful story of how God transformed this guy who was really scary. And the other cool thing is that he came here to visit with our shelter guests and said, when I was here, I thought these people were full of muck and they were not worth the time. But I want you people need to listen to them. And this is where I'm at right now. In fact, I am going to make a $5,000 donation to the mission right now. And so he made that donation, gave it over, and it was pretty exciting to see that transformation.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you have embraced the difficult assignments. I've shared a lot in this podcast, and not like I've always had just the kind of things you've had, but I've typically taken organizations that were down for the count when I got there, with a lot of work needing to be done, and there can be a lot of work, a lot of prayer, trying to figure out, God, what do I do here? But there's also tremendous reward when you see a organization that's turned around. What have you anything else you've learned just about taking on the hard assignments? Because my dad used to say, don't wait in line to try to be the lucky person who gets an easy assignment. He said those lines are long, and you spend a lot of time just trying to look around hoping to get one. He said, just go to a hard assignment. He said, you don't have to wait. You go right to the front of the line. There's no competition, and you can just walk right in and get to work. And I remember one time someone said to me, well, Richard, you Blackabees, you just get all the good places. And I'd said, well, what you have to remember is they weren't good when we got there. I said, they were all bad when we got there. They just became good. And I don't know any other lessons you've learned about just taking the hard assignments.
Well, it's important to remember that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. You're going to have opposition and that looks like flesh and blood, but our real opposition is spiritual. And so the importance of the leader's prayer time is critical. I don't think you can even hope to turn something around. There's good practical skills, and I'm not putting those aside. But you need to spend, if you're the leader, you need to spend time in prayer, in connection with God, with other people, as well as your personal time alone. But this whole thing is spiritual. The battles we face, what I see in these men and women, the reason why they used to call it demon alcohol, because the way it brings out things in people and the way that all happens. And I'm not fighting against these men and women. I am there for them, but I can't come in there and tackle them and tie them down to keep them drunk, keep them from getting drunk. I have to trust that God is going to fix what he does. I can't fix any one of these people, which is funny because when I started doing this at that women's shelter, my first thought was, I'm going to go here, I'm going to fix all these people. We're going to have to close the shelter down so I can get all these people fixed. And it wasn't long before God humbled me. And he said, Rich, you can't fix any of these people, but you can introduce them to me and I can take it from there. And that's what I've done. And that's the only reason I think I've survived this long.
Yeah. I'll be with you in 2 weeks or so, a gala event, annual fundraising event. I always enjoy doing those kind of things when I can, because I believe in the ministry and the work. How much of your ministry depends upon donations and from other people?
Well, 100% of it does, because we take nothing from the government. So it's funny because we've gotten a lot of calls recently with government cutbacks, and so, you're going to lose all this funding. I was like, well, I'm not losing anything. We're completely funded by people. And so we get a certain percentage from the church. We got some local businesses that'll do that, some private foundations here and there. But mostly it's from individuals. It's people who just show up, hear about us either through our events. We do a run every year, and then this gala is our two big events. But between
really, what kind of run is it?
It's a 5K. It's a glow run. We just run it at night, and it's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, my family, we do a lot of 5K runs and things. Those are always fun. Yeah,
we can still run it. And we'll going on.
We'll for those listening, we'll put the contact information. Some of you I think if you're like me, you've really been inspired just listening to Rich and just hearing a little bit about what he does, we'll leave links to his ministry and the website. And you know what? This is the kind of ministry I'm actually going there just to help them raise money for their ministry. And so if you'd like to, we'll have links. If you'd like to do that just here in this podcast, we'd love for you to let us know if you do. If you just feel led of the Lord to give some money to Rich's ministry. We don't actually do this very often, where we just encourage people to give money to other ministries, but let us know if you do. I'd love just to hear that you, because of hearing this podcast, you just felt led to do that and bless them. We probably all could spend some time helping with the down and out, but certainly another way to do that that's very meaningful is just to donate funds to support those who are doing that every day. So, Rich, it's been wonderful just to get to visit with you a little bit. I'm just encouraged to know that there's folks like you out there that are really on the front lines of a lot of brokenness and lostness. It encourages me just to know that there's folks like you out there that are serving the Lord and seeing life change. And looking forward to being with you in person in 2 weeks. And I encourage our listeners, check out his website and just pray. At least take some time just to pray for that ministry and just see. Maybe you need to go, if you're in the Oklahoma area, go enter the run or attend a gala event or something else, or go and volunteer. Just go check it out. My mother grew up in outside of Tulsa, or in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I'm really kind of half Oklahoman in my bloodline. So if you're anywhere in that area, maybe you can get involved as well. And even if you just do it now and then. I remember when I was going into some prisons, I brought one of my kids with me. I just wanted them to experience, and not to necessarily they do that all the time, but I just want them to see what life is like, and also just to see the grace of God, to what God can do to even the most hopeless of people. So, Rich, thanks for being with us.
It's always a pleasure, and I'll keep listening to you.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackv.org.